Okay, so for this pattern, we're using the yarn from our August 2017 Yarn Box Classic shipment. Now what you receive are 3 hanks. You may have received a different color, but what this is Ulta Truth. It's made in Peru, exclusively for Ulta Yarn. There's the website. Okay, if you want to scan that for a complimentary pattern, I'll try to hold that for a second. This is the collar and the dye lot that I have. Now here's other information. It is 80% merino wool, 20% baby alpaca. It is a DK weight, which I did check. It is 12 wraps per inch. I have other videos to really explain that, but I will show you the card so you can see here. So it is 12 wraps per inch, which does put that in a DK weight, which is a number 3, or it might be considered light. Here's some needle information, but that really doesn't apply to this pattern because this pattern is on a loom. I already took one of the hanks and spooled it into what is called a cake. The yarn actually does come with a tag that you can sew in that has the care instructions and what it is made from. So that is actually really, really awesome. It'll give a very nice and professional touch to your project. Okay, so where to start? First of all, you can use any loom that has at least 85 to, well, we'll say any loom from 80 to 90 pegs because your personal gauging will make a difference. I'm actually going to be using 83 pegs on my 3/8 gauge 88 peg loom, adult hat loom from Cindy Wood Looms, which of course the link for that will be in the description below. First thing you need to do, and trust me, you will not regret doing this. It is a little time consuming though. You need to swatch. Get your loom. You can see I was playing around, just trying to figure out what pattern I was going to do. So I was playing around with some different stitches. But here's what you need to pay attention to. The main body of this project, the stitch you will be using the most, is the flat stitch, which I will, of course, go over that. So you need to know how big your gauging is. So you knit up a piece, and I actually used a basic cast off because I can actually unravel this whole thing and reuse this yarn, so I'm not wasting anything. But basically, for the bunting, we need a piece that is 14 inches wide and roughly 50 inches long. If it varies a little bit in either direction, you will be fine, but that's just kind of a standard measurement. So what we need, which let me zoom in so I can kind of show you on here. I do have other videos to show you how to gauge, but I'm just going to show you real quick. We need to know how many stitches, which each of these stitches, that's a peg on a loom. So how many pegs you have to cast on to make 1 inch. And we need to know, how many rows make 1 inch. So I have a ruler here. There are different gaugers you can use. This one has a magnifier in it, so I like that because it makes it easier for me to see. So I hold it down. I hope you can see it. I've got it, the line right here in between the stitches. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I'm getting just about 6. It's just a hair, actually, if I move over, it makes it exactly 6. But I'm getting roughly 6 stitches per inch widthwise. Now lengthwise, these ones can be a little harder to measure, but if you're getting 6 wide, you'll probably be getting about the same long, which I was getting 11. Let me double check my notes. No, I was getting 10. So I was getting 10 stitches, so that's 10 rows that are 6 stitches wide, will give you 1 square inch. So now that you know that, you can actually cast on. But before we cast on, let me zoom out. You need to mark your peg. Ideally, I like to use the 7mm jump rings, the coiled jump rings, for the smaller gauge looms. I can't find mine, so I found old grommets that I had left over from when I was making purses. So that's what I used. In a further video, I may end up switching them out for the jump rings if I find them. But the beginning of this, it was a 3x3. It was a 3x3 rib pattern. And that goes for 3.5 inches. And then we will get into the body. But first we're going to do that ribbing pattern that's 3.5 inches, which if your gauging is the same as mine, it will be roughly 35 rows. So if you want to keep track of your rows, because it does tend to stretch out on the loom and measuring can be a little off, 35 rows. I've undone my swatch. You'll hear some people saying not to reuse this yarn once you've pulled it out because it's changed the integrity of the yarn. But you know what? This right here is a lot of yarn to waste. So I always reuse it. We're going to start with a chain cast on. I'll zoom in. I do have other videos to show you how to do this if you need it a little more close up. Now I make a slip knot. I'm going to start one peg before and I will end one peg after. And this peg for the entire project will just be used with the either a flat stitch or an E-wrap stitch, whatever stitch you are more comfortable with. But okay, we've got the slip knot. You take the working yarn, let me move it up. You got the slip knot, you take the working yarn, pull through the slip knot. I like to take my little tail, put it in the back just so it is out of my way. Your slip knot still, behind the next. Tighten it up, behind the next, tighten it up. Do this all the way around the loom until you are one peg past your last 3 marked stitches. When you're at your last peg, you just take that loop, put it on the peg, and tighten it up. So there we go. So now, if you want to double check your inches, just every 6 pegs is 1 inch. And you got them marked out because you got the grommets in sets of 3. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14 for the very last one. So if my gauging is correct, this should be right at 14 inches wide when it is done. Now for the ribbing, I said it was a 3x3 ribbing, and what that means is you will purl 3 stitches, then knit 3 stitches. You have a choice here. I will be using the U-wrap. Well, I'll be using a flat stitch, sorry. Well, it's fast. It has a nice even look to it. And for me, I like that stitch. But you can substitute a U-wrap, a true knit stitch for this stitch, or just do the flat stitch. I do not suggest using an E-wrap stitch because due to the gauge, it'll be very holey and you're not going to be happy with the looks. So let's start with the purl stitch. I've got all my marked pegs. I will do purl stitch. So you take the yarn out from under, pull up the loop, old stitch off, new stitch on. Oh, make sure. Yarn under, pull up, old stitch off, new stitch on. I got one more to do. Yarn under, loop up, old stitch off, new stitch on. Now for the 3 flat stitches, I just hold it in front. Actually, I guess mine are more U stitches. And then you do this all the way around. You do this for 35 rows. All your marked pegs you purl. The unmarked pegs you you flat stitch, U-stitch, or true knit stitch. I skip the first peg of every row, and you either flat stitch or E-wrap stitch the last peg of every row. I will show you that in more detail once it gets farther along so you can see why I do that. I have my 35 rows done. After those 35 rows, I actually did 4 rows of purl stitch. My yarn was over here, so I flat stitched back to this peg, to peg 1. Then I purled back to peg 83, flat stitched back to peg 1, and then purled back to peg 83 again. You can kind of see the texture showing up. That's just to give a definite ridge between this part and the body. Now for the body, this is the part where the PDF will be very, very helpful because it is wrote out row by row. Because what we're going to do is, first of all, you need to remark your pegs. While I was doing the 4 rows of garter stitch, I was taking my stitch markers off and then replacing them as I was doing the pegs, so that just made it easier. Now the pegs you need to mark are pegs 11 and 12, 21 and 22, 31, 32, 52, 53, 62, 63, 72, and 73. The reason being, for the rest of the project until you get to the hood part, you will purl those pegs. In between those pegs, I've got a couple different things going on. The first 10 pegs and last 10 pegs you will garter stitch until you get to the hood part. And what that means is one direction you go, you will purl. When you come back, these pegs, you will flat stitch, U-stitch, knit stitch, whatever you use. So you just keep that pattern going for the entire thing. Now when I get to the eyelet holes for the buttons, I'll get more into that. But right now I'm going to talk about your next 4 rows. In this middle section where there are 19 empty pegs, we're actually going to do the honeycomb stitch. It has a really nice texture. What I'll do is I'll go over like the next few rows, and then I will work ahead a bit so you can kind of see all the textures, and then go over how to do the eyelet holes and the bobbles and all of that, just so you can have that visual to go with all my rambling. But your yarn should be on this end. If it's not, that's fine. Start with peg row 41 instead of 40 and just repeat them. But basically, for row 40, what you're going to do, you will knit 9, purl 2, knit 8, purl 2, knit another 8, purl 2, then you knit 19, purl 2, knit 8, purl 2, knit 8, purl 2, and then you will knit 10. Each row, if you get the PDF, each row is rowed up, assuming that you will slip the first stitch of every row. So that's not mentioned. And the reason being is this will create, let me show you the edge, a nice finish off edge. So both sides will match. I'm going to go ahead, work ahead a bit, and then I'm going to go over exactly how to do the bobbles, how to do the eyelet holes, and how you actually do the honeycomb stitch. Just throwing all the information at you right now might be a little overwhelming, so I'll do each section individual. How to do the honeycomb stitch. Okay, you can see it has a really neat texture to it, and this texture is created by a combination of your flat stitch, purl stitch, and skip one with yarn in front. I'm here to show you that last section, the skip one with yarn in front, because you do every other row. It gives a really nice texture. Now if you mess up and do 2 rows together, like I had done before I started using my row counter because I thought I could do it. See, right here, I did 2 rows the same. I didn't skip because this one's this one, this one's this one, this one's this one. These little bars in front, that's your skip ones. So if you mess up once or twice through here, it's really not super noticeable. They kind of need to be looking for it a bit because we'll see, there it is right there. So it's not a huge deal. Dexter, you don't need to lay on this right now. So there are 2 separate rows to do this part. The row I'm on is a row where you will purl 3. So these are the 2 marked pegs. Let this focus. Come on. Focus right here. There we go. Got the 2 purled pegs, the 3rd purled. And then you're going to see something that says skip 1 with yarn in front. So we're skipping 1 with yarn in front. But what that actually means is you lift the stitch from the peg, put the yarn behind the peg, that puts it in front of that stitch. So then you purl 1, skip 1 with yarn in front. If you somehow lose your count or forget where you're at and you don't want to mess up this pattern, one thing you can do is if you look really close, you can see the bar from the last row. You can see it's in this one, so that means this one will be a purl this time. And then skip 1 with yarn in front. Now every other row, so coming back, this row will be just knit stitched or flat stitch, whatever, the whole way back. And then your next time coming this way, your purl row, you will be skipping the opposite ones. So it would be knit, it'd be purl 2, skip 1, purl, skip, purl, skip. So it's going to be the opposite of what we are doing right now. And where am I at? Okay, I'm at a skip 1. Sorry, my camera, oops, isn't wanting to focus right. Skip 1. But you do this until you get to the next marked pegs over here. And that is how you create the honeycomb stitch. It's kind of a play on a garter stitch. There we go. Another design feature to learn are bobbles. Bobbles can be incorporated into a lot of different patterns. It just creates this texture, almost like feels like braille in a way. There are these knots, and you have 2 different sets. You have 2 together, 2 apart, 2 together, 2 apart, 2 together, 2 apart, 2 together. Alright, so the row we are on is the 2 together. So you got your first 10 pegs, which are your garter stitch all the way through except for where your eyelets are. You have the 2 marked pegs, which is a purl stitch all the way through. Then you have this first 8 peg section right here. This is where your bobbles will be. The second 8 peg section is just flat stitched the entire time. So this one, the 2 bobbles are together. Now it'll read one of 2 ways. It'll either read knit 2, bobble 1, knit 2, bobble 1, knit 2, or it'll read knit 3, bobble 2, knit 3. We just happen to be on the knit 3 one. So we will knit. I'm saying knit, that's just the term that's going to be in the PDF, but I'll explain all the stitches you can use. Okay, so peg 4 here, 1, 2, 3, 4, is my first peg I bobble. So I E-wrap it, take the bottom over the top, E-wrap a second time, third, 4, and 5. Next peg we bobble. We do the same thing. E-wrap 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Go ahead and knit these 3, and then I will show you what turns it into the bobble. Alright, oh, let me zoom in more. There we go. So we've got our knit 3 and then our 2 bobbles. Now what I do is I go underneath the fabric and stretch it out. So you've created a chain. What you want to find is that first stitch of that chain. Pull it up, put it back on. Go to the second one. See, there's a bar right here. It's that first stitch. Now if you don't get it absolutely perfect, it's okay. But what you'll do on the bobble rows, you'll work all the way over. Let me zoom this out. Your bobble rows, the bobbles are always going to be the same on both sides. So you bobbled 2 together here. So when you get over to here, you will bobble your 2 together. Just make sure to pull those stitches up. I do not suggest finishing the whole row, going back and pulling the stitches up, because if you get distracted, anything happens, and you forget to pull those stitches up, it creates kind of like this long like hole spot in the fabric where that stitch isn't pulled up and creates the knot in the fabric. And everyone's a little different. You can actually do, if you want smaller bobbles, I started out doing 4 wraps and then I would pull the stitch up. If you want them a little smaller, you can do that. The PDF will be wrote out for 5 though, but that is an alteration that you can make should you choose to. Okay, let's keep going. To do the buttonholes, this is how you do it. Well, the first buttonhole was done at row 50 because of this ribbing. The rest of them are done every 45 rows, and you'll have 4 buttonholes altogether. See, I've got 3. Now, how you do these really it's not difficult at all. Let me zoom this in some. You go to your first, you need to count 5 pegs from each side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. From the marked pegs right here. So you take the one on this side, move over to this stitch, go ahead and knit the bottom over the top. You take this one, move to this stitch, take the bottom over the top. Your next round, you will E-wrap these 2 pegs. If this lands on a row where these are supposed to be purl pegs, you do the same. You still E-wrap these 2 pegs. Then you go over to the opposite side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. Again, you do the same thing. Bottom over the top. Bottom over the top. Now I will go ahead and show you. Now these stitches are going to be tighter. Then you E-wrap, E-wrap. Go back to your flat stitch. And then these will be purl, and you just keep following your pattern to the end. After you are done with where the buttonholes are, all you do is, okay, it tells you which rows your buttonholes on. This is, the PDF may look a little different than this. This is just kind of what I worked up to follow because I wanted to make sure I had everything correct. In red, it'll show you where you put your buttonholes. There's also a chart. I'm not showing the chart right now though. But once you get to the point where you have done your last buttonhole, then you just, last buttonhole's right here. Then you just work your way down and you just start back over at row, I just recounted. I reset my row counter to row 41 and did the whole thing a second time. That way I would have the same amount so that when I fold it up like this, let me get this in frame, because what we're going to do is we have our buttons in here and we fold it up like this. We can just fold that down and it'll be even, and then we'll have our hood right here. The texture's really starting to show good now. Of course, this will look a lot better once it's blocked. Now, the hood, I wanted to use elements of this little brim that folds over. That'll be in the front with the hood, and I really like the bobbles and I like the garter, so I kept those and did the 3-rib stitch in between. Again, it is all wrote up. I've got a good start on it so you can kind of see how it looks. Like the honeycomb stitch will just abruptly stop. I'll show you what this looks like right here. But I keep this the same. And there were a few places I messed up, like right here. I forgot to do I messed up a bobble row. I forgot to do them. By the time I realized I was like way up here, and that's kind of a hard thing to fix and pick up. Now there are some things that I did fix along the way. Pay attention to your garter. That's kind of a screw up. Note to everybody. Do not binge watch season 3 of iZombie while knitting. I got a little distracted and had a couple frog spots that I had to go back and fix. But for this hood, I'm going to show you how I marked everything. I never did change out the grommets. They just seemed to work good for me. So I kept the front the same. I've got 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, of course, for our garters part. We still have the 2 purl, the pearls marked. And then we have our section of bobbles, the same. And then the 2 pearls, they're still marked the same. So both sides, that's the same. Everything up to the 2 stitches past your bobble section is the same. Here's where it differs. These are 2 purl stitches, so we want 3 flat stitches, 3 purl, 3 flat, 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 and then it gets you to the other side. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sets, and then there's like an extra 3. So 6 sets of 3 purl stitches followed by 3 flat stitches to create the ribbing, and it's the same ribbing that I used at the beginning. So this can kind of show you how it will tighten up once it's down farther, because right now this is all you can see. For this hood section, you want it to be roughly 10 inches long. So you want to do 60 to 65 rows. For me, I'm doing 61 just by my gauging. So 60 to 65 rows for this hood section. So you want to get that done. And we are now at the cast off point. I kind of started a little bit. Basically what we'll be doing is taking the stitches from this side and moving to this side. There is an odd number of stitches and we want these sections to match up. So here in the middle, there will be one middle stitch right here that is left. So the stitch from this peg will go here, this one will go there, that one will go there. So the ribbing will match up. But what I did, my very last row, I flat stitched the whole thing. So the whole seam will be flat stitched. Now to show you how to move the stitches from this side to this side, first you got to get the stitches off the loom. I'm using a circular knitting needle. If you do not have one, you can use safety pins. Just go and buy the biggest safety pins you can and kind of pick the stitches up with your hook and put as many on a safety pin as you can until you get them all off. Then you go about moving them. But if you got a circular knitting needle, I will show you how to do it with this. Now this I find to be the easiest way to hold the stitches because you don't end up getting any of them mixed up. And all you do pick the stitch up, kind of open it up, put the needle on, pull it off. Open it up, pull it off. You do this until you're at your halfway point. Now, if you're, oh, hold on. There we go. Yeah, just do this until you get to your halfway point. Just remember, the very middle peg here, this one will stay. That one stays. This will be the last one you pick up. So go ahead and do that. Got our stitches taken off. So what you want to do to put them back on is basically just make sure you got them in order, and you'll put them on just in that same order. I'll show you with the first couple, and then I will do the rest, and then we will finish this cast off. Remember, this is in the middle of these three, so we don't want to use it. So you just pull them off one stitch at a time, whether it is, you know, little tapestry needles, or you're using safety pins, which safety pins are kind of nice to use because then you don't lose stitches. You just go all the way through and put your stitches on every peg, just like that. Okay, so we have the 2 stitches on each peg. That last one just has 1. Now, when you're doing this, if you find it hard to get the stitch on the peg, you may have it twisted. So if that happens, just twist it the other way, see if it makes it easier. Just be very, very careful because it's not fun to pick up drop stitches at this point in the game. Alright, now the cast off I'm doing is it's a Kitchener cast off. There are different forms you can do. This one tends to give the best result. And honestly, I don't know who came up with this, but it is wonderful. So what you do is you take your yarn, which should be coming from this peg here, because you don't cut it, at least not yet. You wrap it 3 times around the area you're working on, or you can wrap it around the whole loom 3 times. It's better to have extra than not enough. And then you thread it through a tapestry needle. Couple things I kind of want to get in your head thinking about before we do this. The difference between a true knit stitch and a true purl stitch. A true purl stitch, the yarn is coming up from the bottom. So the yarn goes up through the stitch for a true purl stitch. A true knit stitch, the yarn goes down through the top. So knit goes down, purl goes up. And this is actually in sections. So you knit, purl, purl, knit, purl, purl through the whole thing. But you kind of go back and forth a bit. So I'm going to show you a good ways down. And hopefully with the combination of me showing you and the written directions in the PDF, which I'm not sure how I'm going to write this out yet because that's going to be fun. Hopefully with the combination of both, you can do this without any problem and get a wonderful result. If after watching this you find this just too hectic, what you can do, take the bottom loops over the tops and do a basic cast off. You will have like a crochet edge at the top of your hood though. Alright, so knit goes down. What we do is we will knit the first stitch, the bottom stitch on peg 1. And you don't want, okay, there we go. So we knit the bottom. And then we are going to knit the top. Alright, so we knit. Now we got to purl, which is coming up from the bottom. We're going to go to the next peg, purl the top. So we purl the top. Just make sure the yarn doesn't take and wrap around other pegs or anything. So we did our knit, knit, purl. Our second purl is going to go through the bottom loop of the first peg. Now, if you find you're having trouble, my tapestry needle isn't quite as thick as it is not quite as thin as I should have picked. Because remember, purl goes up. So we knit, knit, we purl, purl, and we tighten. After that purl stitch, peg 1 is done now. So now we go to peg 2, and we are repeating this step. So we are going to knit, knit, which actually, just to help this go faster, knit goes down through the top. Like, even me, I am looking over and referencing my notes just so. Okay, so you do the bottom one, and then you do the top one. Knit goes down. So we have our knit, knit. I want to make sure we can tell the difference between these for now. We did our knit, knit. Now we go to the next one. We purl the top. So that goes under. Now we go back one, and we purl the bottom. Kind of tighten that up. Peg 2 is done. Go to peg 3. We knit. Just down through the top. Down through the top. Knit, knit, knit bottom, knit top. Now we are going to purl the top of peg 4. And then we're going to go back and purl the bottom stitch on peg 3. Peg 3 is done. Now as you go, you should be able to kind of tighten up these stitches as you go. And I would suggest kind of tightening up before you do your cast off. So we got 1, 2, peg 3, we are on peg 4. Knit. And then we knit the top one. Alright. Now we're going to purl the top of the next one. Now your knits always land on the same peg, and your purls are always separated between the two. Purl the bottom stitch of the previous peg. Now we keep going. Alright, I hope this is making sense. You do this to get to your last peg, and then I will show you what to do. I'm at the last 2 stitches. So, well, the last 2 pegs, I mean. We are at a knit, a knit, oops. Now remember, if your yarn, twist around the pegs, undo it. And then we have a purl. We go back, purl the one before. And now for the scary part, you can pop everything off the loom. Now I started doing it up here, and you can see how it's turning out. you can actually, it's not going to be the same all the way through because I've got so many different textures, but it won't be this huge big ridge. Now see how it's kind of loose right there? You can take and just kind of tighten these stitches up along the way. Gonna have to pull around and find which one's which. And then when you get to your last stitch, you can just take, you can pull that and tighten it. Just pop all the stitches off. And then the only thing you'll have left is to pick out your buttons, sew them on, weave in your ends, and wash it. Okay, see, I still had plenty of yarn left. Now I can take and tighten up that last stitch right there. You can actually tighten up a few of them. Alright, now I didn't go through and tighten up the stitches like I told you you could, just so you can see what it looks like without it. There we go, there's the hood. Alright, so basically here it is. We just need our buttons and put them in place. And see, the one I made more for, I'd say 0 to 3 months, maybe up to 12 months, because this is a good sized baby right here. Now, if you need it for a larger kid, all you do is make the body bigger. That's it. You just make this longer. You don't have to add more buttonholes or anything. You just do it right in the middle. Let me see here. So this will button up. So here's the final size of this one basically. We've got our hood. Got like the little collar here, and then we will have 1, 2, 3, the 4 buttons. But before I do the buttons, I'm going to wash it. Basically, I have this is a wool blend. It's a merino alpaca blend. So I have special wool wash that I'm going to use. You can just soak it in cold water with a little bit of soap and just kind of agitate it a bit. And then when you dry it, you want to kind of press it in between a couple towels to dry it. And you will notice that these stitches will relax and it will actually stretch it some too. And then you lay it out flat to dry. Alright, so here it is after it was washed, all laid out to dry. Now what I did is I took and laid a towel over and pressed as much of the water out as I could, and then I laid it down, just kind of shaped it and just made sure it looked as even as possible. This one you don't need to pin anything down. The curling really, it doesn't curl much at all due to the stitches I used. So basically leave that sit overnight to dry. Pick out what buttons you want. You're going to need 8 because the buttons are going to be right through here to match up with the other end. Alright, so I've got my buttons sewed on. I wasn't really sure what to use. I just took it to the craft store with me and I found these cute wooden 9-hole buttons. And I sewed them on. You can see I sewed them on just kind of different patterns. Wasn't really sure what the best was. But that's it. You're done. When you sew the buttons on, what you want to make sure you do is you want to get buttons that fit very tight in the hole. You don't want to use toggles if this is going to be for an actual child. And bigger buttons better. Just as choking hazards. But I'll undo this side. And you can see how I figured out. So to figure it out, all I did was just fold it up in half to where this last hole and button were really, really close. That way this bottom was completely closed pretty much. You can do it however you want. You can make the body longer because this one, as you can see in the cover photo, this one was made for a little newborn, little beautiful Tori Jean. But guys, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Any questions or comments, you can leave them in the comment section below. If you have any actual questions, my email address is in the video description below. Don't forget all video links. The video, if you need to get to one specific spot and you need help with one certain thing, there are video links in the description below, as well as a link to the PDF and the blogger article. Guys, I think that's it. I hope you enjoyed.